All right, well, I have two after, so let's go ahead and get started. We'll have some folks, I'm sure, joining us as we continue our conversation today. Hello, everyone. I am Dwayne Brezak. I am the Executive Director for the NASW Michigan chapter. We are so excited to have you here today. This is our kind of kickoff event for our National Student Engagement Series. So we'll be planning a whole lot of other conversations as the semester progresses. We thought that a conversation around supervision, mentoring, as the semester started would be really appropriate. And we hope that today you'll learn some new tips and tricks as you start the semester. You have your questions answered as you build relationships both in your program and in your field placement, and that you kind of just leave better prepared to be excellent social workers. So I'm so excited to be joined today by two amazing colleagues from across the country. We have Dr. Susan Vallem, who is an emerita social work professor from Wartburg College and is currently serves as a clinical licensure supervisor for Lutheran Services in Iowa. And then we also have Marie Gress, who is a licensed master's macro social worker with specialties in older adults and technology. I'm going to turn it over to them. They're going to be our primary brains today, giving us some of their insight and wisdom. I'm going to be here facilitating questions. Please feel free to use the chat box to type in any questions throughout today or share resources that you may have across the country. We'll make sure that the chat log is available for folks after the session. We are recording, so just be a note of that. And we do have transcription going at the bottom if anybody needs that. So I'd love to turn it over to Susan and Marie, kind of with a first question. What is your number one tip that you would give social work students as they start the semester?
Susan, you start.
Okay, well, all right. Again, having served as a field director, a field liaison, and a field supervisor, basically really be upfront and open with your faculty members as well as with your supervisor. When you visit who's going to be your field supervisor, really tell them what you're interested in, what you're looking for. Give them some examples of your own experience. This is not a time to be humble. And so that's a good way to start a working relationship, is to tell them something about you, but then also what you're genuinely interested in.
I think my number one tip for students in your supervision is to come with questions. I'm not here to lecture you or micromanage you. I want to know what you want to learn. And I only know that by the questions you ask. I only know where you're struggling if I know what questions you have. And so that's the first thing that I tell my students, along with their agendas, which we'll talk about later, is to come with questions. I want our supervision time to be centered around you and what you want to learn.
I want to echo that too, is that experience is for you. What's going to work for you? What do you need? What do you want? I can only echo exactly what Marie said, because it needs to be your time and your focus.
Now, I know when we were prepping for this conversation too, one of the other tips that Dr. Vallem said was the social work F word. And I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time to give us, what is the social work F word?
Right, I have told by the students that when everything else hits you, the social work F word is flexibility, flexibility, flexibility. The other one you might use once in a while, but let's not do that in supervision. So,
yeah, and
so be flexible.
I think we've all learned over the last 18 months that flexibility is really critical in our field. And many of you, this may be your first field placement, or this may be your second or third, depending on your track in the social work field. But making sure that you can kind of go with the flow, that is what we need in social work. So as students are thinking about or starting their semester, starting their supervision, what are some of the first things that when you're building that relationship, should you be considering to make that relationship as strong as possible?
Yeah, when you're trying to build a relationship with your supervisor, I mean, rapport is one of the first things that we talk about in social work anyways, right? Like, how do you build rapport, especially if you're doing a remote placement? for me as a supervisor, when I start our sessions together, I'm asking you about your weekend. I'm asking you about, I don't know, other things that you've mentioned in the past that you're looking forward to, just trying to have some of that interpersonal connection. So like we're real people. We were joking before we let everybody in. I am a real person. I'm sitting in my home closet right now talking to you guys with my gaming headset on, and this is just who we are sometimes. And so making the most out of that relationship is sometimes just connecting with each other on a personal level. It can make some other conversations you have down the road a little bit easier if you have some of that established relationships, which you'll find is true when you're working with clients as well.
I agree, because I want to know a little bit more about the person. Not only what have you studied and what are just job wise, but about you. Do you have a family? Do you have pets? Do you have things that help me to understand a little bit more where you're coming from and your areas of interest? And the same thing too, come with questions. I'm happy to share not intimate personal details, but a lot about myself, so that we get to know each other as persons, because we will be working together. And so neither of us really needs any surprises.
My other tip is to use an agenda. And I mentioned it when I was giving my initial tip, but I have my students come prepared to talk to me about something, whether it's those questions I mentioned before, or let's see, what do I have them put on their agenda? I have them list out the tasks that they've been working on, so they can provide me some sort of update on those. I want them to tell me what's been working out well for them, or what they may be struggling with, what's a challenge they have, again, task related. Or one of my one of my interns, her grandma just passed away. And so a challenge that she has is she just missed a week of school and a week of internship, and how am I going to get through all of this? And so we can plan it out together. If I know that is a struggle you're having, if you're telling me about it, if you're coming to supervision prepared with that conversation, we can move forward. I found that my students that think about their supervision time beforehand, fill up that hour, no problem. I've even gone 2 hours with a supervisee because they've just filled up the time with all the questions. It might even be like questions around the exam, or looking over their resume, or it really could be anything. Just prepare what you want to talk about ahead of time with an agenda. That can be a formal or informal thing depending on your supervisor styles, but yeah, that would be my other way of making the most out of this relationship.
Right. And I also want to know, are you doing this, well, we should know by that time, your internship full-time or part-time? Do you also try to work outside of that internship? Do you have courses that you have to take, so that we begin to look at what you have for a time commitment, so that we don't overdo you and get you stressed? So that we try to make sure that we work that out, because I know that students just carry a heavy load, workload, classroom load, internship load, all of that. And I want to make sure that we fit the time and make this work so that it works for you and you have a successful time, as opposed to being stressed from the very beginning as to how you're going to fit it all in.
That sounds like that goes back to that F word, that flexibility, right? Like, we're all humans, right? As students, you're busy. As professionals, we're busy. We have a lot of moving parts in all of our lives. How are you getting the most out of that structured time while you're in your field placement? One question though from Alex, this may just be helpful for the group, is maybe just briefly, if the two of you could talk about what your specialty areas are in social work and how you've interacted with students in the past.
Also, please, where you're from. I don't still understand what's going on. Please quicken me. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Right. I'm from the state of Iowa, and part of Iowa NASW, and I have taught in Iowa social work, and I work in Iowa. So that's rural Iowa even.
And you said you were a clinician, right, Susan?
Yes. Well, yeah, I professor clinician. I did a year of advocacy in Washington, D.C. So a little bit of a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and as for myself, I am a licensed macro level social worker, for those of you who don't know what macro practice is, we're more systems focused, and that could be administration, executive director of a service agency. It could be doing research, it could be doing evaluation, it could be policy. Sometimes you find macro social workers doing I don't know. So I personally do consulting right now. I for 6 years, I worked at a senior community center running their aging services. And then I opened up my own practice as a macro social worker. And I work with area agencies on aging. I work with senior centers, adult day facilities, you name it, in the aging sector across the country. One of the big things that we've been doing from the get-go is technology related services. And so over the pandemic, we found some really fun ways to integrate what agencies were doing in person with some of their online presences, including a virtual senior center mobile app, which is really neat. So that's just a little bit of context about me. I've been supervising students since probably 2012, 2014, somewhere in there. And I think that was all of your question.
Yeah, and the goal for folks who may have not heard at the beginning, but we're hoping that this conversation is going to be utilized regardless of your type of practice, where you live, where you go to school. Social work, the educational and the field component is fairly standard across the country because of CSWE credentials, right? We know we're all going to be in sorts of different placements and locations, but the framework is similar wherever we are. And so this conversation hopefully will apply regardless of that situation. Now, with that, one of the things I'm curious for everybody.
Dwayne, can I just jump in
Sure.
just a minute too? That even though I am primarily a clinical supervisor and a clinical focus, I have my interns and I practice as well as much advocacy. They all have to do a community research project. They all have to do a policy analysis, that kind of thing. So, I mean, remember that social work really is biopsychosocial, spiritual, and all of those components should be part of your internship, your practicum. Even if you're saying, I want to be a therapist, or I want to do a macro, or I want to do whatever, all of those fit together. So if you're a macro person, some clinical experience, just that interviewing, and you don't have to be a therapist necessarily, but those therapy skills, if you're a clinician, those macro skills, practice skills will also serve you well. So I think it's all important. And that's one of the things I like about social work in particular, as opposed to even some other degrees, is that we do look at things holistically, systems, person and environment. All of those actually do make good sense.
Absolutely. And we've got a pretty good mix of folks on the line today. So I'm just going to ask for folks, if you can type into the chat box, if you're in a placement this semester, are you in person or virtual? And so for our panelists, while you're typing in that question, what have you seen as the differences in building relationships, whether you're in a in-person and a virtual setting, and what are some of the pros and cons as we've moved into the kind of the pandemic related types of field placement?
Yeah, I would say for in-person versus virtual, in-person allows, how do I want to frame this? Okay, so something I like about virtual practice is that I am able now to work with 10 universities across the country. I have access to more students who have even more different perspectives and experience than what would be available in the town right next to me. And I've really enjoyed that. I've enjoyed having the focus, and my students have really enjoyed the type of work that I'm also able to expose them to, because we're all remote. It's not an opportunity they would have had otherwise. Something that is harder virtually is making some of those meaningful connections, right? So if we were in the office together over lunch, we might talk about this, that, or the other thing, my cat, your dog. We might talk about teas or coffee shops and all of the events going around town, right? There's some of that connection that just kind of happens when you're working right next to each other, or you're able to pass in the hallway, lunch, etc. And so that's harder. That's harder when you're remote. That's much harder. Some good ways that I have experienced would be breakout rooms. So some of the organizations that I've worked with, we've utilized breakout rooms to help build that connection, and that's made everyone perk up a little bit. You're not just going to another Zoom meeting where you're just an invisible face or name or whatever. You get to have connection with a couple of people. For my interns this semester, we are trying a Google chat room, kind of like Slack or Discord, but just within our entities. So we're chatting a little bit more with each other that way. And we do monthly group supervision. And about halfway through that, once we've kind of talked about worky things, I'll get them started on informally chatting with each other, and then I'll leave. And however long they decide to stay and chat is great. Just let me know so it can count towards your hours, because that's something you would have done anyways. I feel like it's a piece of morale, and that networking is just a necessary thing as you go on to your next job and stuff. So I want all that time to count. Susan, I'll give you a turn now.
Oh, well, no,
Sorry.
Maria, you're ahead of me. You're ahead of me on technology. Basically, the agency where I work is, we have our own system, which is HIPAA approved, so that we can talk about cases or other individuals. And I like getting folks together in a group. The one drawback I find in remote is that I don't know the area resources. And so I rely on my intern and the field liaison to sort of clue me in as to, are there some resources? Are there some other things that we should tap into and that we should be doing? But otherwise, you can develop a relationship. Well, we've had to this past year and a half online, as well as working in person.
Wonderful. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, my screen just got a little bit weird for a minute. So I mean, that's really important. I know for me, last year having virtual interns for the first time was a struggle kind of on both ends. You know, it was a learning curve for the organization and for the students, and building that rapport can definitely be trickier when you don't have those in between conversations. You can't just pull somebody into your office to say, hey, this is a great conversation happening. We'd like you to sit in on this, or this random event popped up and I want you to attend it. You have to really be a little bit more thought out and careful about that structure. And so as a student too, you know, really being an advocate for yourself when you see opportunities or you hear about things. And so I'm wondering from the two of you, what are some ways that your students have excelled at being advocates for themselves?
I would say with preparing those agendas and with those questions, I have really found that they are using that time to be a better social worker, to learn how to do a skill more in depth, to get feedback. My students will be working on, say, a grant for grant writing, and we'll go ahead and pull it up together because they just have questions on it. There was another example that I thought of, and now it's escaped me. Susan, you take a turn and then I'll jump back in.
All right. Well, yeah. Well, we always have to have a learning contract. And I find that I tell them that that is a work in progress. And so we'll generally set out meeting that CSWE requirements and the requirements that the particular school or college or university requires. But within that, it's kind of like a moving target. And so I do ask them to be prepared, to plan ahead as we meet and say, oh, you know, I just learned about this, or I'd like to try this, or do you know of some place where I could do this kind of thing. So using that learning contract and as a work in progress, but it keeps us focused, keeps us going, but then brings in other things that would really be helpful, and it would meet those requirements as well.
Yeah, I think asking questions for me is like the number one thing an intern can do, especially at like an organization like NASW, but really in any social work setting. There are so many acronyms, there are so many players, there are so many agencies that are involved in all of what we do, that oftentimes you sit in a meeting, even if you've been at the agency for a long time and you're like, I got no idea what that group is or what that acronym is. And so especially as an incoming student, it can be really overwhelming at the beginning when you're hearing lots of information and maybe not having that full context. And hopefully your supervisor, that's a place where you can bring any of those questions or even ask them in a meeting. Usually it's still appropriate to ask that. But in, whatever you're not fully understanding. And the other thing that I say with my students too is you're not just a learner, you're also an educator in this process. You come in with a lived experience and a set of skills and a breadth of knowledge that is likely different from all of the other people at your placement. And so how can you incorporate those and really use them as an advantage during that small time that you're at your field placement? And there's so many skills that I see that students have that they don't view as social work, but they really do enhance your social work capacity, whether that be writing, photography, art and music, sports, connections to faith community, all of those things really can tie into how you integrate into your field placement quicker, how you connect to the staff at your organization, and then how you can maybe overall thrive earlier on in your placement setting.
Yeah, and I know that this is mostly students, but I did see some supervisors here. One thing that I try to do with my students, they'll ask if they can use some webinar as a learning opportunity. And so what I have challenged them to do, if it's something that costs money and they want to be reimbursed for, they have to write me a one-pager about how it's going to benefit the agency, how it's going to benefit them, how it's going to benefit our clients that we serve, etc. So they have to write up a little proposal about how they are going to be intentionally engaging with this thing. But if it's a free webinar, let's say it's something that's through school, I had a student want to do, so we work mostly within the aging population. I had a student want to attend a human trafficking event. So I challenged her ahead of time to think through this kind of proposal. But when she, after she went to that webinar, she had to answer some reflective questions for me. So what was something that you took away from this, your key takeaway? What is something you liked about what was being shared? What was something that you thought could have been better? And then I'm forgetting question 4. What questions do you have? And then anything else. And so if you're a student, I encourage you to approach some of your additional learning opportunities that way if you want some other things to count for hours. And if you're a supervisor, challenge your students to be thinking about some of that stuff.
Another thing I look at is that most students, interns are in a concurrent seminar. So what are your colleagues doing? What are the other schools doing? What are the other agencies? Are there some things I didn't think about, but it would be a really good opportunity for you? So again, back to asking questions and being a self-advocate. So I often come up with things that, or hear of things that another agency and another school are doing, or a student is doing, and we can make it work or not, but explain how come it doesn't particularly fit what we're doing. So make sure you share what goes on from the trainings that you do. And I certainly encourage my interns to do various trainings that fit what it is that we're working on. And also, what are you learning from your colleagues in seminar?
Well, and Susan, you talked about, knowing what students are doing outside of your program. And that sometimes can be tricky. One of the biggest pieces of advice I give students at the beginning of the semester is put the social in social work. It's half of our title that we've chosen in this field. I know the introverts on the line are probably cringing a little bit by me saying that. I'm an introvert in an extrovert job, right? Yep, Marie's got her hand up too. But it means we have to be connected and resourced, and being connected in social work is a really important step that students can take. So it's starting with your cohort, right, at your program, expanding that to your faculty, then at your internship, and then there's like the next bubble. How do you get outside of that immediate university or school of social work bubble? That can be parts of your community organizing, that can be parts of your memberships and things like NASW or other associations. It can be you going to conferences or trainings, participating in online forums where social workers are present. And so starting to really earlier you can do that in your social work program, the more equipped you're going to be to graduate, and the more probably recommendations you're going to get about finding jobs and resources and community advocates. So really taking that time, even in your field placement, to like figure out who are the key players, how did they get into their job, what sort of networks did they have to have in place to get into those positions. And so I always say, you know, do some informal interviewing as well when you get into your organization, to ask people, whether it's your supervisor or other staff, like, how did you get where you are, and who did you have to know, and who would have been helpful during that process.
See, my number one tip is questions. You have to ask questions.
Right.
Absolutely. So Susan, you had mentioned the learning agreement. I was super happy when I graduated, and I thought I'd never have to see another learning agreement again. But then I became a field supervisor, and so then you got to do it all the time.
You are all over again, I know.
And they're all different.
But yes, it's a different setting. But I'm curious from your perspective, both of you, how do you use the learning agreement, and how do you use it past the day you turn it in and when you have to sign off at the end of the semester?
Oh, well, it's a work that we do together. And if we don't bring it up every session, we do fairly regularly. Where are we? Let's look at what have you completed? What doesn't seem to be working? Oh, you just learned about something else. Let's try this if this doesn't work, and let's see what we can do. So we use that as a working document. And I use that sort of as the agenda, or as Marie says, the agenda or the structure, so that I make sure that wherever possible, we've not only met the requirements, so we don't come to the end and go, oh golly, didn't have a chance to do this, this. Also, to be comfortable with things that maybe my agency can't do. We might not get everything in, but I want to make sure that we work in that direction. And it also is a work in progress. So sometimes things come up. Oh, this isn't going to work, but I just wonder if we could do this. Could we do something else? How can we make this work? So it's a really important piece that I use almost regularly with the students that I supervise.
Yeah, so I get really frustrated with some of these learning contracts. They are different. I think it's been different at almost every school that I've worked with, how they're set up and how they're utilized. It is something that you have to turn in, but not necessarily how you're evaluated. And some schools are working towards fixing that. I think 3 of the 5 schools I'm working with this semester have made their learning contract your actual evaluation tool, which is really nice to see that integration.
Yeah.
So one thing I encourage my students to do, that I would encourage you guys to do too, is to look at not only your learning agreement, but also what evaluation tool is going to be used at the end of your semester. Because I use that evaluation tool to help my students build out their learning contract. If what you're going to be evaluated on in the end is to have access to policy opportunities and direct practice and all of these things, we need to make sure that all of that is part of your learning contract, so you can be successful on both at the same time. And so I encourage you guys to look to make sure that they're the same, or that you've looked at both, so you can be working on all of that together, and make sure your field supervisor is aware of that. Almost all schools technically require new supervisors to come to their orientation. I know that I have not gone to all of them that I was supposed to. And so there could be brand new supervisors who also did not go to that like they should have, and that's on them, right? But your grade is also on you. You need to take as much ownership and control of that as possible. Your supervisor doesn't know when it's due or anything like that. You need to make sure that you're keeping all of that in check before your supervisor does. All of that said, oh, sorry, Susan, just one more thought. I know I'm long-winded sometimes.
No,
my dad was a pastor. My dad was a pastor, so it's just a family.
I'm half Southern. I jump in on the end of sentences, so please.
My other thought with learning contracts is to really think about, like, what what do I want to learn? It's a learning contract, right? Or an educational agreement, some schools might call them. And so actually think about what you want to learn and what opportunities could be there for you at the agency, and ask your supervisor about it. If there's a couple of blanks that you have, ask if they have ideas. But really take as much ownership of that document as possible so you can have the best experience possible and a good grade at the end.
I also like to bring in fairly early, it could be a Zoom call, it could be in person, the field liaison. So again, like you said, Marie, that we make sure that the learning contract, the evaluation, everything is in place. So again, we don't come up with any surprises. So if that isn't scheduled or part of your agenda, I would encourage students to ask their supervisor or the field liaison, can we get together and make sure that we're all on the same page and that it moves smoothly. Some liaisons do show up on a regular basis. They say, we will be meeting this time, we will be meeting at this time. Others, let me, it's like, call me if you have a problem. And that's the last we hear of them. So I do encourage, yes, that opportunity to work with your school as well as with your supervisor.
Marie, you had mentioned as part of the evaluation how important it is to check kind of what the feedback or the end of the semester evaluation also looks like. So Liz asked a question kind of tangentially to that. What are some ways that students can solicit more detailed feedback besides doing great from a supervisor on a regular basis?
So that's a really good question. And I would first ask if you've asked your supervisor to give you more feedback. Sometimes that can be really intimidating though, right? They could have a really strong personality. They could not be very receptive, but just like, hey, for this assignment or for this learning thing, I have a few more questions, or I don't know, just like, you need to probe them a little bit more if they're not offering that to you. It's almost like, I mean, they're not your client, right? They're your supervisor, but some of those theories and practices and techniques we have in interviewing people work on coworkers too. And so asking more probing questions or more pointed questions can be helpful. What do you think, Susan?
Right. And I think we'll eventually sort of move into this topic too, but you all have a field liaison, you have a field director, and always go to your supervisor first. If there are things that you see need to be done or done differently or whatever, but also utilize your field liaison and your field director. I've been that way too, and had students who had some genuine concerns, and sometimes we could just sit down and chat, and it works really well. If they're, especially if they're uncomfortable about, well, this is my supervisor, they're going to give me a grade, I don't want to cause any difficulties in our relationship. So again, that relationship with your school as well as with your supervisors.
Liz, I saw where you wrote your comment that you
yeah.
are trying those things, and she seems lost for words, that you are her first student.
Mm-hmm.
And so while you have every right to ask for more feedback, the human in me is also like, oh, this is her first time. Like, this is new for her too. You're kind of learning how this is all working the same rate. I would see if there's anyone else in the agency that you could ask if they've had interns before and how to approach the supervisor. I would, you could go to your field liaison, like Susan was saying. Just sometimes how to approach some of that is a little bit more delicate. And so I would just encourage you to really think about, especially any words you're putting in email, right? Yeah, there is a best practices and social work supervision
Yes.
document. And so if this is something that is coming up for both of you, and she's really struggling, you can ask like, hey, maybe this will help. I don't know. I'm looking for feedback. I can tell that you want to give me feedback. You're just not sure what to say. Yeah.
And I was going to suggest, if you find an example, because you can find, evaluation, feedback lists, good questions to ask at supervision. And as a student, you can bring those in. I always say, like, blame your school or blame NASW. Say, oh, I was on this webinar and they suggested this resource, right? Or they said this thing, right? And so it takes a little bit of that pressure off of you sometimes as a student. And that's perfectly okay to do. I'll make sure to post that standards of supervision in the chat as well. If somebody hasn't already. Sorry, my chat box is frozen, so I can't see anything right now on that end. But yeah, that's a good idea. Use talking with your cohort and your field class, right? They're seeing what other students are getting and sort of in their feedback from their faculty. And maybe there are some models that you can bring in, especially if it is a new person. The other thing that is newer to kind of our intern and our field relationships is social media. It's not brand new, but it's like in the last 5 to 10 years, it's become more and more of a thing in our organizations. So I'm curious from you all, how do you manage social media requests from interns, that relationship, and what is the role of social media in building relationships with both your field staff and maybe your community outreach?
Yeah, so I tell my students that I use my Facebook page as personal. It's mostly family, friends, maybe some other colleagues that I'm not working with, and things like that. And so I won't accept a friend request from an active student at the time, but I use LinkedIn all the time. I'm on LinkedIn almost every day, and that is my professional network. And if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I am more than happy to do that. I also like that as a suggestion because it makes them freshen up their LinkedIn as they prepare to go out into the workforce in case their worker or their potential employer is there looking at their LinkedIn. So that's how I approach it.
I agree. LinkedIn is really good. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of those. If I'm your supervisor, I'm not your best friend, and there is a boundary there, and I don't go there. I also encourage everyone, students, to always see what Google has to say about you, Facebook, and don't assume that it's only friends, because anybody can eventually find what's on Facebook. And so be really careful with social media, and be very careful about, and I know you're warned about this, but I can only reiterate it because we've had problems, not often, but once in a while, of wanting to talk about what you're doing on your internship, and it gets too close to case identification, to some of the work, some of the people, that kind of thing. So basically I'm saying don't use social media for anything to do with your internship. And I can probably find it, and I'm not a techie. So just be careful what goes on there. But I don't accept those. I agree. LinkedIn is a really good source and a good way to start your professional use of social media.
And I'll be the devil's advocate on this part of the conversation. As a macro placement where social media is the way that we communicate with a lot of people, we do potentially add our interns to some of our social media accounts, because to be admins on pages, you have to be friends with that individual. And so you do have to make clear what those boundaries are, and then that person is going to see all of your content, as well as you have access to see all of their content. We at our agency, NASW Michigan, we've set up a second Facebook account specifically for interns who either don't have social media or don't feel comfortable sharing their own platform. But the other thing with the sort of work that I do is there are so many resources and groups that are on Facebook specifically that I want my interns to be aware of, that over the course of the semester, I may share or tag them in things on those platforms to be an additional resource for their placement. But you're both right. It is a very sticky boundary. You have to be very clear. This is the expectation if we're going to add you to all of these additional platforms to assist with that part of our work, you just need to be very cautious about that. And I definitely echo, Google yourself, look at yourself on all the platforms, make one of your friends unfriend you, and then see what they can see on your social media platforms. And so you're just very clear about what profile of you exists out there, and it's what you want it to be of you. Yeah, Marie.
I was wondering, Dwayne and Susan, do you look up your potential potential interns? Do you look them up on social media before you interview or after you interview?
Depends on if I sort of know them or know the school, and but I do get some requests from schools I don't know, the person I don't know. So I look up the school curriculum, I look up who's part of it, and I'm talking about not so much NASW programs, but mental health counseling, marriage and family therapy, some of the clinical psychology, this kind of thing. We get requests from all kinds of master's programs. And for there, I do look up the curriculum. I do look up social media. I do try to find out more about that person. Not that every MSW student is is stellar, but yeah, it depends if I know them and I know the school, or if they're coming from a school I don't know anything about, then I usually do. So yeah, I do.
On my end, I would say generally at some point you will be Googled, maybe not specifically searched on Facebook or something, but as an incoming member of our team, you're a member of our team. And so we have to make sure that there's not anything out there that would really be problematic for us to have you be a voice of our organization. And so it is important to know what version of you exists, or if you've got somebody that has the same name and that one that pops up all the time, but maybe your image is the main image that pops up in like a Google search, that somehow that's navigated before you start your placement. Because the internet is a tricky place, and you just want to make sure that you are presenting how you want to be. And there may be something that's not great on the internet, or there may be some piece of information that you're not ready to share with a placement, but that gets shared. Maybe you have a past criminal background that is a public record, right? And your internship finds it out, and that's going to create a different conversation than if you brought that forward, right? And so that goes back to also that social work skills 101, asking questions. We have to be in that communication loop. If I am going to Google an intern, I generally will tell them that, this is why, we have this going on. It's again, that consent piece of, I don't want it to be a surprise that I've looked you up, but I also expect that my interns likely have looked up me if I'm going to be their supervisor as well. It's just the time we're living in. It can be a little bit different if it's a client that you're Googling versus an intern, but you also still want to be very cautious with that relationship.
Yeah.
Dwayne, I think you brought up a good point too. In the initial interview or so, be upfront. If you've run into some legal troubles, if you have had a history of substance abuse or something like that, it's probably going to come up. Be honest and be upfront. That does not exclude you from an internship, from being a social worker, from being licensed, but these need to be upfront. And so if there have been some things, just be honest about it and bring that up. And I've had students, and they have been great students. They found jobs, they've been all of those kinds of things, but no surprises. Just be honest and upfront. We're social workers. Yeah, I was gonna say we're social workers, so yeah, we'll make it work.
Likely we all have some sort of story is why we're here, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Some of it just may be more public than others. Yeah. So the other kind of maybe the last question as folks start the semester is, what are some tips for how students can get out of their comfort zone and really dive headfirst into their field placement?
Take a risk. This is a learning opportunity. So again, I know you probably get a grade or your evaluation, but most of us are not going to hold you up on an evaluation if you really want to try something and maybe it doesn't work out. Or some of my students and my interns have discovered, it was really a good experience, but I don't think I want to do clinical. Or something like that. So sometimes it's a learning experience to say, it's been a great opportunity. I've made all kinds of connections. I've learned a lot. I've decided that this really isn't my calling. I'd rather think of some other, way, or I want to work with older people. I don't want to work with kids. And so, I mean, how many of us, I was going to work with children. I'm not real great with children. I love, irascible adolescents and adults and those kinds of things. So sometimes you find out where your strengths are and what your gifts are, and it helps you to focus a little more on maybe where you'd like to go career-wise.
I like that. And that's something I tell my interns when they're starting, like, look, I'm not trying to make you work with older adults. I'm not trying to make you stay in macro practice. But what I want you to walk away from this experience is to have a deeper understanding of social work, to know more of the options that are out there. How often do we get pushed through high school and have to pick something right away, right? I want you to know the options that are out there. I want you to know some of the opportunities that you have and things like that. As far as getting out of your comfort zone, it's hard because to get out of your comfort zone, you have to feel like it's a safe environment to do that. And to feel safe to step out of your comfort zone, I think that supervisory relationship can be really important. So I kind of go back to building rapport and all of that, to feel like this, if I try this new thing, I can ask questions. If I try this new thing, it's okay if I make a mistake. You're an intern. We kind of expect that you're going to make a mistake here or there. We're training you for the future. We're not expecting that you have it all down perfect at this point. We want you to kind of try and put yourself out there. Yeah.
And this,
Two
like you
questions.
said, make mistakes are okay, right?
Yeah.
We're not expecting you to be perfect. And also we're going to make mistakes, and it's
Oh,
okay to
yeah.
call us out on it too,
Yes.
right? We hope we're
Yes.
all
All
doing
the
it in a
time.
friendly way.
Yes.
All
Yes,
the
I
time.
look forward to interns to say, this didn't work, or I asked you to do this and it didn't happen, or something to that effect.
Right.
Again, we have that relationship that we're working together in everybody's best interest. I have two quick examples of one intern I did who really thought she wanted to do clinical. Her internship was clinical. She's never done clinical in her life. She went off and did a macro job and said, all those interviewing skills, all of those things I learned really helped. But she decided that she didn't want to be a therapist, but she took those skills from her internship and is doing a phenomenal job. Another one, her focus was administration. She wanted to do administration and worked in the agency where I was, there's a lot of clinical. So I exposed her to clinical. She found she loved clinical. So she ended up doing clinical, even though her initial focus was going to be administration, much more macro. So use those opportunities. They're all good opportunities. You will learn something and be able to use them all in your work, but don't feel like you now have to do just this kind of thing because I did my internship in this focus.
I had a student who wanted to do foster care, and here I am, like a consultant with aging services. And so we were talking about her skill sets, and I ended up plugging her into a grandparent raising grandchildren program, and she loved it. And she's hopefully going to be hired by a grandparents raising grandchildren program real soon, but she's in the final stages. But just really exciting. If you put yourself out there and just try something new, it could be really great.
And that's what I love about social work, right? Is you can do anything, anywhere, with anyone. And there are so many new things popping up in our field all the time, and new places where people are working that I never would have even thought possible when I was doing my MSW program. I mean, you can work with chickens and horses in your practice. You can use technology and build avatars of yourself and your clients and work in virtual space. There are social workers. I was working with, or talking to a social worker last week. She works at Best Buy, and there's 40 social workers that work in Best Buy, and they work with
isn't that
adaptive
awesome?
technology.
Oh,
Right? It's like, oh
excellent.
yeah, a social worker should be working with adaptive technology. And so it's a really cool time for you all to be in social work school, because they're like, the world really is your oyster. You can pick where you want to go. The job market, like, everyone's hiring right now. So like, pick what you want, find that niche market, find what you're passionate about, pull those things that you don't think are social. When I'm a musician, I'm a photographer, those things are also social work skills. You have to have documentation. You want to have, like, art therapy and music therapy are things too. And it can enhance how you feel about the work you're doing when you can bring in your personal passions.
Right.
But I think that,
I just say some who, several who've become police officers, and I'm so proud of them for that, because they bring a totally different perspective than somebody with a criminal justice major or that kind of a background. And they are really valued. And so they never thought about that, and are using their social work skills as police officers.
yeah, there's so many non-traditional
opportunities.
settings.
Yeah.
I mean, social workers in abolition framework, working to create kind of outside entities around community engagement as it relates to safety. NASW is working a lot on looking at best practices for social workers involved in community safety, whether that involves existing police or kind of creating and reinventing a whole different kind of dream society. You know, we're at that place now where we have to think about how racial justice and anti-racism practice intersects at all of our works. And I'm hopeful for all of you who are on this call that you're having those conversations in your placement as well. How does the work that we're doing perpetuate oppression in our communities? How are we working to create better policies? How do our existing policies, are they problematic in some ways, but sometimes we got to work within the system and combat the system at the same time, right? That's what social workers are often good at, but we have to be asking those questions too. And I think this generation of social workers coming in are much more activist oriented than past generations, which I love, but you're going to probably get a little bit of pushback sometimes. Pushback, right? We want you to be the pushers in the field as the new social workers, but it may be a little bit frustrating. So know that you've got a lot of partners out there. And again, that's the more you can expand your bubble within the field, even nationally, you're going to find people who are partnering on those sorts of initiatives that you really are interested in. Or if you're looking to transform the work that your type of social work is now into something maybe more dream, there are folks that are doing that too. And so figuring out and using your intern time to make those connections whenever possible. And so both you, Susan, and Marie, you had talked about sometimes you're in your placement, you're like, this may not be the sort of social work I want to do long-term, or, oh, this placement isn't that great for me, or I have issues with my supervisor. So what happens? What can you do as a student if you find you have some dilemmas with either the type of work you're doing or the personnel you might be working with?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think that if it is an issue with the placement itself, the type of work that you're getting access to or not getting access to, talking directly with your supervisor about how you're looking for X opportunity or Y opportunity. My classmate is doing this thing. If I partner with her on that, can I count that towards my hours? You know, that's where some of your self-advocacy is coming in, right? But talking with your supervisor about some of those things, if it's a placement and task activity kind of issue. If it is an issue with your supervisor, you need to talk to your field liaison, your professor leading that class. You need to let them know, whether it's during one of your seminar discussions, asking for some feedback, or if it's one-on-one with your field liaison. That also kind of depends on what exactly the issue is. But looking for their feedback on how to handle the situation, and if you need to transfer your internship to a different placement, if you need to do some independent study-esque kind of things in the meantime.
I second really all of that. Talk to your field supervisor. First of all, if it's a task or some things you'd like to see or things to do, but if it is difficult and you're just not getting what it is that you want, or there are any other issues, that's why you also have a field liaison. We don't just send you out and say, good luck, we'll see you in 6 months or a year. So that really is because, and having done the role of field liaison, we have changed placements. And it wasn't that the student failed. Sometimes it wasn't even the supervisor failed. Sometimes we have supervisors who really want to help, want to be part of that. And then they lose some of their staff, or new rules and regs come and they're so overwhelmed, they just don't have time to do that. And they don't want to say, I just don't have time to do this. So sometimes we've changed them for reasons like that. But it is your internship. It is your grade, it is your money, and you need to advocate for yourself so that it is as good an experience as you can get.
And if you end up with an ethical dilemma in
Yeah.
your field placement,
That's
please call NAS, go to your school first,
Oh, yeah.
right? That's
I was just
that's
gonna
the
say,
best way.
yep,
But
yep.
the
Mhm.
national NASW has ethics consultations available for members. Many of the state chapters also have ethics committees or consultations available at the local level that can help process through, maybe it ends up going into you need to switch to a different placement, but maybe there is a way to work through it, right? And sometimes things happen at your organization that you may be forced to exit, whether it's your choice or not. And I'll give my own personal example. My first placement in my MSW program, they lost funding halfway through my first semester. And so in like the early November, it was like, well, you're done for now because we're closing the doors. And in one way, it was a really good learning experience because I got to see how an agency shuts its doors. But also as an MSW student, it was really terrifying because my school was like, we don't know if we have a placement for you. I was also a macro student and there were not a lot of options for me. But there may be things that happen that force you to go somewhere else. And again, that flexibility in social work, things tend to work out. We're ultimately, as a social work community, we look out for each other and we want the best for each other. And if you find yourself with somebody who doesn't seem to be in that belt, they're probably real burnt out or something else is going on that they need their own support. And so going again, initially to your school, I think is always number one. They're going to know the best way to handle it or the options for you. But then there are additional resources at your disposal in the larger field, whether it's CSWE or NASW, or maybe some other supports you have across the board.
I want to put a plug in for joining NASW if you're not, and especially at a student rate. It's really a bargain, and it's one of the best resources that I have used as a practicing social worker, as well as a supervisor, as a faculty member. It's really there, and there are people I can ask, and I get good input, and I get ethical, legitimate feedback. So just
Their forums are active. You have active forums on NASW.
Yes.
And when we get to resource sharing time at the end,
right.
we're going to have one of our members talk specifically about the My NASW student community, which is a great way to connect on a national level with folks.
Right.
But we're hoping that you're also connecting on a state level. I know in Michigan, we have a student Facebook group open to any student, whether you're a member or not. There are lots of those because we want you to have the ones with your cohorts on your campus, but we know that every campus is very different. In Michigan, we have programs that have cohorts 8 in a cohort to going up to like 450. So a group of 8 is going to get a very different set of information regularly than a group of 450. So being connected to that larger community is possible. And when I think about what my role is in the association world, I am a social worker for social workers, which is weird, right? But what you all do for your clients, whether it's developing a resource, a training, being an advocate, doing legislative work, we do that for you in the field. So if you need something, we hope that you will come to us ultimately. Okay, so this is kind of switching topics a little bit, but one of the things especially the last 18 months is really talking about anti-racism work within social work. And one of the really hot topics in field is how can a student or what sorts of supports are available for students if there are microaggressions happening in their field placement, whether that's from another staff, a client, or maybe even their supervisor.
Oh yeah, I just had that experience with one of my interns, and we had to look at what it was and how come he really was, well, just aggressive with my intern and her own reaction to that. And so we brainstormed, we talked about how do you deal with people who disagree with you or people who, and she was concerned because he is in a supervisory position, but nonetheless, how do we use our good social work skills? And so I said, okay, let's pretend, how would you do a client? What would you have to say to a client? And how do you you have to work with this person, you have to get along. So let's look at our skills to see what we can do to make that work. If it does not, then as the field supervisor, I'm your advocate. We will the three of us will get together and go this way. But I really appreciated her saying, I'm upset about this conversation that we had.
Yeah, I used to work in a community setting at a senior center. And so my interns would be part of running programs. And part of our orientation at the beginning is if someone says X to you, if someone says Y to you, if you feel like this is, you're experiencing a microaggression, you are allowed to say that's not appropriate, or please don't say that to me, or please don't touch me, whatever that is. You are allowed to have a response to stop that behavior. And then if you're comfortable continuing to have that conversation, right, we're a community center, so there's some people you're going to build more relationship with than others. If you're comfortable continuing having that conversation, that's fine. If you want me to come in and take over, I will do that too. As your supervisor, like Susan said, I am your advocate, I am your ally, I'm going to back you up. For the other staff that we had at the center, I had a script made up for them. So no matter what staff person the student went to, the other staff who are less experienced in having these conversations could still have something to make sure that they were backing up the student about. And so having that kind of structure in our setting was really beneficial, and it made the student feel more comfortable to come in and talk to us. And so ask your supervisor if something similar to that exists at your agency. If it doesn't, ask what it would take to put something like that in place, so you and future yous can know that you're going to be supported no matter what happens.
This situation was neither sexual nor racial, because there are company policies. If it was, or I thought that it was unethical, I definitely would then go to the next level and call out company policy and say this is inappropriate. It was just somebody who was angry and basically took it out on my intern inappropriately.
And I think, what we all know, right, is racism exists within social work, sexism exists within social work, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, right? All of those still exist in what we would like to be an ideal profession. And so they are going to pop up at different times in your field. And we are a very white field. So for all the white social workers, including everyone on this panel, right, we have to constantly do our own work. And it's not on the social workers of color to educate us to transform our organizations. We have to be bringing that in, and also being allies if we hear something that's problematic from another coworker, right? And so it's challenging, right? And I know that you all also experience that in your classrooms as well. Your student time is also a learning time. So there are going to be mistakes that you all make, right? We all make mistakes throughout our career, and hopefully those turn into learning experiences if there is an issue, because we come into social work with a whole lot of different backgrounds, experiences, religions, cultural practices, right? And sometimes those conflicts aren't a conflict. You may not have known it was wrong until somebody calls you out on it for the first time. And so we need to take those experiences as growing experiences, and hopefully it will better us long-term as practitioners across our span. The other thing that you had mentioned, I think it was Susan who mentioned this, sometimes you realize maybe in your placement that, maybe social work isn't the right field for me. And that's okay, right? So what happens if you get to that point, or maybe you're a supervisor who's on here and you're working with a student, you're like, maybe this isn't the right field for them. What do you do at that point?
Well, it's pretty hard if you're in your last semester senior practicum, but we'll still talk about, how can you take those skills, this degree, and find where you belong. For our program at Wartburg, we have a 140-hour beginning field for either first year or sophomore students. And that's where we have that conversation. And if that, and we get a lot of feedback from the field supervisors at that particular point in time. And sometimes we've had the conversation that this definitely, for whatever particular reason, isn't going to work, because you've paid your tuition and you are a student at our college, our university. You have a right to graduate from there, but it's not going to be a social work degree. And I take the gatekeeping extremely seriously, both for undergraduate and for graduate students and interns. And so sometimes we need to sometimes it's helped them to find what you want to do and how to use those social work skills for whatever it is that you wish to do. But sometimes it is this, there are some real ethical issues, or this just is not your calling. And I will stop an internship. I will, because I feel like I have an ethical responsibility to the clients and to the agencies that each one of my students and my interns is going to serve. And if they just do not have, if they're dealing with a humongous substance abuse problem and haven't resolved that, or some other kinds of issues, or we may ask them to take a year off, get yourself some help. School loans, nothing comes due, but really look, you have to have yourself in pretty good order. So take that time off, get yourself put back together, work on the issues that you need to work on, and then come back, feeling much better and ready to go.
Yeah, I'm pretty upfront with my students with our conversations, especially now that we're remote. We don't really have a lot of time to like waste together. So when I start noticing that there's red flags, I'm going to talk to you about it pretty soon. Let's say first, you're not filling up our supervision time, so it's taking an hour. All right, so new action plan. I need you to not only prepare an agenda, but you have to send it to me ahead of time. I'm noticing that they're not pulling their weight on this project or that project. Hey, I noticed you're falling behind on these projects. I want to talk to you about that. And sometimes like it's family stuff or whatever. Okay, we'll create a new action plan. But maybe it's really not right for you. So once we have enough of those conversations, like what's going on kind of thing, I'll want to bring in your field instructor. And I've only had this with one student. I've told that student ahead of time, like, our next step is to pull in your field instructor to have a conversation about what this internship means for you, how we could proceed, or if this means termination, and what our options with termination means. Sometimes termination means, like Susan was saying, it's like a pause. It's just like a pause, and we're going to pick up. You may have to reduce some hours, but we'll pick it up after you've kind of rectified some of this other stuff you have going on. And sometimes termination will mean that you have essentially failed the course. And what could that do to your GPA? And what are some of the ramifications? Because even when we approach that termination, I'm still wanting you to have whatever good options are out there for you. And like Susan said, we'll just keep talking about it. Just keep talking about it.
It's not meant to be punitive by any means.
No,
it means to help the person. But if you can burn out in a heartbeat if you have got so many other issues and that kind of thing. So now is the time to deal with some of those kinds of things, so that when you get out there and start working, you're just having the best time of your life.
I did have one student who felt like at the end, when we were at the community center, that social work maybe wasn't for her. And so we talked about how certain skills, like you were saying, Susan, are transferable. And when I started my own practice, I had no idea how much motivational interviewing went into consulting and how much talking about a client or organization. So for me, an organization is my client. So what are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? And in our level of social work, we call that a SWOT analysis, but it's doing a lot of the same work. And so how is some of this transferable to other practices? Why are social workers going into evaluation, into data analysis, into HR? Because our skills are transferable. So don't limit yourself.
Exactly.
Yes, and we need social workers in HR, in management, in politics, right? We need
yes,
people at all of those important
Please,
decisions.
someone, yes.
And there is this new generation of leadership coming into our field. Partially it's pandemic related, right? Like we're seeing just like large exodus and retirement across many professions, but social work is a little bit of an older profession to begin with. So we knew that there was going to be, in the next 5 to 10 years, this shift in kind of who is in charge of many of our organizations. And honestly, I'm at NASW level, I'm starting to see it. You know, the job postings that are out there right now are much more of the management level sorts of positions that we wouldn't see as many in a year. So I want to make sure that you all who are graduating now are prepared to move up those agency ladders as quick as possible. And I was talking with another staff about this today, like, student debt is an issue that this generation, including my own, even though I'm 36, cares about much differently in many settings than in past generations, because we're burdened with it a lot more. You know, it's a thing that really can impact where you work after you graduate. Do you have to be at a placement that qualifies for loan forgiveness, right? What is the sort of, how much do you get paid? And if it doesn't qualify for loan forgiveness, does that pay make up for that sort of a gap that's in there? And so we need folks in who are running our organization that also understand the current climate of people who are entering our workforce, right? And so getting those macro level skills, even if you're in a clinical program, are still really, really critical. And also understanding how policy and politics intersects with the work that you're doing, regardless of your setting, right? You know, being at NASW, I see how politics and policy impacts social workers all the time, but it really does dictate, do we have funding, right? Who has access to services? Can we put in a student loan forgiveness bill, right? It's all about who's in your office. And what's difficult about being a part of a national association is we represent 50 states who have 50 very different political environments, right? And so unfortunately, like what California might be able to do, it's very different from what Arkansas might be able to do. And so partially, again, going back to why we need you all as part of our team as an association is you are the voices on the ground in your local communities. And we don't know what's going on in every local community if you're not part of that conversation. So just another little plug for membership, whether it's NASW or another association. So the next
I gotta
question,
add one
no, go
more
ahead.
thing,
Yes,
real quick,
please.
like, yeah, another one of my phrases is that clinical without the political is hypocritical. We can't do one without the other. And I want to say, don't everybody bail out of clinical, please. We're desperately short in Iowa and across the country. So
You need to make that a bumper
you
sticker.
can
Like
kind of
that
do
would
it
just.
I have done
up the whole
several
back.
workshops on, yeah, in fact, my students have said that's going on my tombstone, but anyway, yeah.
Oh my
so
gosh.
clinical without political is hypocritical.
And there's a lot of political right now that we need folks to be doing stuff on.
For sure.
So I've got one more question about before we kind of open it up to more broader questions and resource sharing from the group. So as folks get, and this is they're at the beginning of the semester, but this is thinking a little bit further ahead in the semester. What are some good ways that students can think about wrapping up or closing their internship at the end of the semester? What are some of the things that they can do to make that a successful process, but also then make sure that they have those connections going long-term forward?
I mean, some of that goes back to if you and your supervisor talked about social media use, it is a great way to stay connected. I mentioned earlier that I don't let my students friend me on Facebook, that I keep that pretty tight. But you know, if you're going to if you end up in a similar field, if it's been 6 months, that's usually like my gap between internship and possible friend requests. No promises. It is my Facebook page, y'all. But you know, and you're in a similar field, like Dwayne sent me a friend request, and yeah, I'll be Facebook friends with Dwayne. Like, not passing that one up. And
sorry, I've tagged you in so many things.
oh my gosh, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. And so just you know, you can ask some of those things, like we said earlier, we're people too. I think another popular one is references. So what, like, do you want your supervisor to provide a job reference? Or if you're a bachelor's going to master's or master's going to a DSW, do you want a reference for that? How can you sort of help set the stage for that? How you just go ahead. I mean, you can just go ahead and ask us. Every supervisor is going to ask you to provide something a little bit different. I typically ask my students to not actually write the letter, but like, who is this going to? Like, you have to write me a little bit about that. You need to tell me a little bit about the strengths that you want me to highlight. And I'm not going to lie on your letter, but I'm also not going to fabricate anything either. So Yeah, that's just awesome things to
All
keep
right,
in
and I
mind.
want to know something about the job description so that,
Yes.
and we'll have that conversation too. Whenever I do a reference, I also let my person see a copy of it. I don't like this hidden kinds of something. And if I think that, if I'm uncomfortable in giving a reference, or I'm uncomfortable with kind of where you're going, so that I will say so up front, and we'll talk about it. Doesn't mean I won't, but this is what I will say, what I won't say. And yeah, so, but I think that's really a good thing to ask your supervisor. If, and how far out? I mean, if this is 10 years afterwards, do you, I'm probably not going to do a reference at that point in time for somebody who had been a supervisor, but or I mean, a supervisee, an intern, but how far out would you be willing to the next year, 2 years, something like that? So always ask if you can, if you, that supervisor would be willing to be a reference for you.
Yeah, that's a great piece, Susan, because I will also just echo, if you're stay in contact with your supervisor or your the folks at your agency that you got along with the best, because you may need them for a reference 3 to 5 years later. And if you haven't, if you just like cold call them, and it's happened to me 5 years later, it's like, yeah, I remember you, but I don't remember at all what you did while you were there. So I'm going to need a refresher. You're going to need to send me your updated resume.
Exactly.
I need a copy of the job description, right? All those sorts of things where if you at least, every 6 months, just send a quick little, just checking in, want to make sure you're okay. An email, if you are a social media friend on LinkedIn, right? I also will write my interns LinkedIn recommendations, because that's part of the LinkedIn
yes.
platform as
Yes,
well.
absolutely.
And I don't think social workers are not great at LinkedIn. It's starting to merge a little bit more into that world, but that's a good way to utilize your supervisors, is to write those recommendations as well on that platform, because it's public and everybody can see them at that point.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to switch into Q&A from you all, but before we do that, I'd like to do a quick little stretch, because we've been on here for a little over an hour and we're in the Brady Bunch formation. So if folks can just do their quick little, give their high fives to the people above and below. It's a good stretch. Great. Yeah, great. Perfect. All right, so we've got a couple of questions already in there, and then I'd like to turn it over to the folks who are listening in. But this question is from Alice. What would you recommend for a student who has their agency wanting them to stay on after their BSW placement for their MSW placement?
You would have to check with your school for sure, because sometimes that's a no-go. And sometimes if it is a yes, you have to be doing something completely different. They want to make sure that you're actually going to be doing MSW things, not just continue doing BSW things, because it made it really easy for the agency if they just got to keep you the whole time, so I would definitely check with your school.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, some schools are beginning now to allow for paid internships, others aren't. But it would have to be something different than your BSW, and in many agencies, it has to be something completely different than the work you're doing if you're doing your MSW or BSW internship. So that varies with schools.
And also, my recommendation is, if this is your first and only social work experience, likely get a different experience for your MSW placement. Because again, the field is so diverse that even if it's the same population, it's going to be a completely different experience at a different organization. But it's a good sign. And that's, again, if the organization is wanting you in some capacity, make sure you keep those folks on speed dial for your references later on, or maybe there's an opportunity for them to bring you in for some sort of part-time paid work if you have that opportunity available, right? There are so many random opportunities that pop up in social work that if you just throw yourself out there, you may be surprised at what things pop up. I've been invited to be a part of like national radio podcasts and done national Twitter chats. Like I never would have thought I would have been doing none of that in my MSW program. And there's so many cool things out there for folks.
And our agency is so large and it's statewide and so diverse that you could do a BSW and an MSW, but we would make sure that it's totally different. Your experience, you're not doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So I know we've got Jessica Riley. Jessica, if you want to unmute yourself, I know you had some resources to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I just want to say, Susan, Marie, Dwayne, y'all have been amazing. This has been super informative and engaging. And I just want to say I appreciate your time because I've just been in it the whole time. So my name is Jess. I am a former intern from the NASW Texas chapter, recent BSW graduate. And yeah, so during my time there, I was able to create my NASW student community online forum. And I just feel like this is a great space to share it. So I'm going to go ahead and just drop a link and just to talk about what that forum is. It is specifically for NASW members. So if you are already a member, then you already have a My NASW account set up that you just have to log into. And for folks who aren't members, just another reason to join. So let me resend that link because I didn't hyperlink. But yeah, it's a really amazing platform. And throughout the training, folks have definitely talked about asking questions, being a self-advocate, getting out of your bubble and beyond your campus. And this is just a really amazing way to do that. So if y'all are able to, oh my gosh, I don't know why it's not working. Here we go. Nope, that's terrible. Sorry, I don't know what my copy and paste is right now, but
I love technology.
I know, right? Me too. I'm really pretty good at it. But yeah, I just wanted to go ahead and put that out there. There are thousands of folks online that are just like eager and ready to talk social work. Our questions and the experiences that we have are different from working professionals a lot of the time. And so this online space is really just an opportunity to connect with peers that you wouldn't have a chance to connect with. I was one of the only macro people in my undergraduate program, and I really found a lot of community on that front, beyond my campus, which I really needed at that time. So that's just an example of how it can be used, but I hope y'all will check us out and stay up to date because we also share NASW events on there, including this one. So if you're on the forum, you probably saw my post today.
No, it's
Jess.
a great resource, Jess. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks y'all for letting me speak.
And most of the NASW chapters have internships. So if you're looking for kind of a different placement, feel free to reach out to us. Because in New York State, if anybody from here is in a New York person, their students helped start the Revolutionize Social Work series, which they launched last year, which has been an amazing resource nationally on racial justice work and how do we have critical conversations within the field around various topic areas. So as a student, you can really make a huge impact. You can be kind of the workhorse, the worker bee, or you can kind of be running the show right off the bat, depending on what you want to do. So again, utilizing that time to what you want to get out of that year that you're in there. What other questions do folks have? Feel free to unmute, or if you want to type it into the chat. I still can't see the chat, so if somebody would read
I
it.
saw earlier in the chat, someone had asked about how to keep track of their tasks and projects and things. And it really depends on my advice for you is it depends on a lot of things about your person, right? I really enjoy making myself to-do lists. And so I have actually enjoyed using task managers like ClickUp has a free version, spelled just like how it sounds, clickup.com. And Trello, those are both really neat options to kind of keep track of what you may be having going on. I like ClickUp and have encouraged my students to use this because it will track your time too. So if you have to track, if your supervisor makes you go like that nitty gritty into it, you can do that, or just have a report on this is the time I spent this week. And it's a good communication tool.
Right. There's a question about generalist MSW programs. Hard to know how many of those there are around. I think again, if that's really where you want to go, that's a really good, that was my particular background. However, again, as I explained, that you can take any of that kind of learning and translate it. So I wouldn't worry that it's specifically a generalist program. Also ask about a doctorate. If I hadn't gone into teaching social work, I wouldn't have bothered with a doctorate between you and me. I mean, that's mostly to keep my institution and academic happy. So it was a good program, but yeah, I mean, your MSW is what's going to get you, or your BSW. Make sure you get licensed. All right. Make sure that because that sets you apart, whether it's BSW or MSW, I really recommend licensure. But I
In
wouldn't.
Michigan, you can only call yourself a social worker if you are licensed.
Well, you have title
Otherwise,
protection. Iowa,
yep,
everybody,
we are-
you can
we
hang
are
out a
title-
shingle and say I'm a social worker. So that's why really why I encourage, at least if you don't have title protection in your state, to get licensed. And if you do, you probably have to be licensed anyway. So I really recommend licensure.
And this isn't a licensure session. We're hoping to have one of those later this year, but
Right.
as it relates to licensure too, it does vary state by state.
Mhm.
Marie is a macro licensed social worker. I'm a macro licensed social worker, but there's only a couple of states that actually have a macro license different from the
correct.
clinical license, right?
Iowa
And-
only licensed clinical, which is, yeah, another whole thing that Denise and I have had more than one conversation about.
And
but
that can
yeah.
be additional a benefit of belonging to NASW is you're going to get a state chapter membership and a national membership. So if you move throughout your career, that state membership will follow you wherever you go
Mhm.
and connect you with the licensing, especially over the next 10 years. Get ready. There's going to be a lot of stuff
yeah.
about reciprocity, and
Yep.
as telehealth continues to expand, it's going to be a hot mess of policy for the next
It
few
is.
years. But I just wanted to also say in terms of tracking, what I do with my interns now that we're in a virtual space is they have a daily log. It's just a Google sheet where they put what they're doing, and it can be from the medial, sent an email to this person, but then we also have columns for which competency it aligns with in your learning agreement, if there was a follow-up person that you need to do, who that contact was. And so then we can go back to that at our weekly supervision. And even at the baseline level, if you just put your tasks in your day, that gives a good sense for your supervisor
Mhm.
that you are working on things throughout the week. And it helps you. I know for me at the beginning of the start of a semester, it's going to seem like you're not doing a lot because you may be reading policies, getting to know people, sitting in on meetings. Those are all tasks that does have a skill if you can just take that little bit of extra time to see what that skill was. You know, it's relationship building, it's policy development, right? It's all of those things that are going to be tied back to your learning agreement.
Right. Dwayne, I see quite a few questions
Great.
about teaching, about doctorates, that kind of thing. If they want to email me, I'd be happy to share some of the ins and outs of moving from social work practice into teaching and then moving out again. But at a college level, university level, would be happy to have people just please contact me directly, and I can share some thoughts and some ways and various things like that. So.
Yeah, and honestly, as it relates to teaching, especially at the adjunct level, again, maintaining good relationships with your faculty, because those can eventually turn into jobs for you
Yeah.
in the adjunct world. If you're, especially once you get into your specialty area of practice, your schools or your local entities may be wanting somebody. Marie, is that you?
No, you just touched on a question that someone had, so I'm just holding
Yeah,
my
great.
thought.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so someone had a question. What if you're working in a similar population as your placement? How do I get the most out of it? There's two theories of thought on this, right? The first is this specialty thing, like Dwayne was talking about just now, where this is where all of my experience has been. This is where my passion is. I'm going to continue learning and diving deeper and deeper into this area, and really flesh things out that way. There's other people who want to experience different things and experience different populations, so they have a better sense of what's out there and where they fit into it, how they can do the most change and most benefit to our communities. And so that's just another way to approach it. If you are passionate about that population, then make the most out of it by challenging yourself to go deeper into it. What's something you don't know? What's someone you haven't had access to? What's a question you haven't asked before? You know, like, it's going back to those questions. What else can I learn about this? How else? Maybe I know we keep talking about macro because Dwayne and I both love macro, but like, maybe there's a policy thing that's affecting this population and issue, and that's why you keep getting drawn back there to your area. But if this is not actually where you want to be, maybe you see how you can kind of be getting into some other opportunities, even though you're still at that agency. Like the example I used earlier, my student was interested in foster care. I don't have foster care opportunities at my aging consulting agency, but we can work on grandparents raising grandchildren, and we got met halfway there. And so that's something else I would encourage you to do if that's your situation.
Wonderful. Now,
I just posted my email if somebody wants to get in touch.
great.
so.
And mine's going to be posted as well. I know somebody had asked about the supervision spreadsheet, and this webinar will be available to watch later on. But I do want to be conscious of time because we are at 7:30. So if there's maybe one good last question in there that anybody sees or wants to unmute and ask.
Yes, I had a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the I don't know if it's totally related to supervision or anything, but about the COVID mandate. Now, I don't know how to maneuver through if I don't want to do it. So how am I supposed to maneuver through that?
So with that, you'd likely want to first talk, what is your school's policy for this semester, right? And that's usually going to be a starting point. And then does your organization have a policy? If you're a virtual placement, it may be less of an issue. If it's an in-person environment, you may or may not be allowed to be at that particular placement, at least for right now. But I would start at your university or your school of social work, and then likely talk, if you are interviewing or you're in a field site, what their particular recommendations or their policies are for this semester specifically. I don't know if Susan or Marie, if you have another point to that.
That's just, up to schools and the agencies, and they're really virtually all over the place. So, yeah.
Well, can I ask a follow-up? I mean, just from what you guys have seen out there where you say it's a lot of shortages with jobs that we currently having, is there an opportunity to where I can get a job where that won't be mandated?
I'm sure there are jobs that aren't going to mandate it, right?
Yeah.
It may somewhat vary about what the population is you're working with, right? If you're working with a very immunocompromised population, there may be different rules. I know it's just going to really vary right now, and it's a tricky one to navigate for folks.
It is because as a social worker, I've been asking my colleagues, old teachers, I've been asking everybody, how do I maneuver through something that's very strong to me? And I'm being met with basically like, you're going to have to do it. Like, you're going to do it. You know what I mean? There's no silver lining, it seems. There's no, like, nobody understands where I'm coming from. You know what I mean? So it feels like of all, professions, I would think social work, you know what I mean, would definitely understand, interpersonal things, having dominion of your own body, things like that. So I'm just a little not confused, but upset, and I have anxiety because I don't want to do this, and it's due to my own reasons. I won't get into it, but this is just something that's not for me right now, and I don't know how to maneuver through this.
Remote social work is always an option. Oh, someone just typed that in the chat. Remote
Right,
social
that's
work is
exactly, yeah.
It's always a good option. Telehealth is becoming a bigger thing. I do almost all of my work remotely. If there's someone who's in my area who wants to have an in-person meeting, I might make an exception, but almost all of my work is remote. And so I would encourage you to look at some of those options.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm currently working remotely right now with Detroit Wayne Mental Health Authority as a residential care coordinator. And they just mandated us, but I'm working from home. And I'm like, if I'm working from home and I'm not around anybody, you know what I mean? Like, why, I don't know. I'm upset. I'm sorry. Because it's very hard for me, and I'm trying to like figure out what I need to do. And I don't want to quit my job, but it seems as though that's where it's going to go.
And there may be federal mandates coming too. And so that may there likely are exceptions that people can request for if they have reasons or they're physically not able to get a vaccine. But at the end of the day, there may be reasons where you may not be able to be at certain places right now. And it's tricky. We're living in a different time than we've ever had to be in before. But we're a public health field, we're a mental health field. So we're also there to protect our communities and our clients as well. So thank you for that question, though. It's something that definitely I know that all the schools as well as NASW is continuing to work on.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, you're welcome. Maybe one last question. I think there was somebody else trying to unmute. Maybe not. That's all right.
Dwayne, there was one in the chat that we
Sure.
didn't touch at all. Hi, it's Denise from Iowa. And it was about how do you get experience doing assessments if you're doing a virtual field placement?
Yeah. So she ended up messaging me directly, and so I'll just share with everyone what I told her. I've had my students shadow me on our networking calls or assessment calls, and then I'll let them find, for our situation, they'll find a client and organization to work with. They'll do the reach out. I'll shadow them on the call, right? And then once we're both comfortable with how they're handling this to go solo, then I'll let them go solo. And I would expect something very similar for clinical placements.
We do exactly the same thing on clinical too. And we have enough people on teletherapy that yes, they can do those assessments. And so, right, but we have to get all of that information just as if you were in person, but we're just doing it remotely. And so, yes, I do the same process.
Well, that's a great way to wrap things up. I really appreciate you, Marie and Susan, for sharing your expertise with us today. I know from the three of us, we want to wish everyone a great start to the semester. Know that you've got a lot of people rooting for you and got your back, whatever you need this next year. Please reach out to us should you need anything. We will be having hopefully one of these every month. The next one will hopefully have the date out in the next couple of weeks. That's going to be a more generalist, not social work generals, but a general social work student town hall. So we hope that you'll bring questions, concerns as the semester has started, what sort of resources and topics are going on at your campus, and what would we like to talk about as a larger social work community. If you'd like to get involved in any more of these specific conversations or help run one of those, please feel free to reach out to me. I think my email is in the chat. If it's not, I'm at the NASW Michigan chapter. You can find my contact information there. But I just want to thank everyone for being here, and we'll hopefully see you next month.
All right. Thank you all. Great.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.